I have one really key question, which is, there's three panelists here who are what I perceive as dedicated session border controller vendors, and one, Bob the last, who is essentially a voice switch vendor who is adding session border controller function. And I think there's some debate among the carrier and vendor community about which is the best packaging model. So, I mean, for example, I'm aware Cisco recently announced that adding session border controller functions to some of the high-end routers. So the question is, should it be a standalone product? What are the pros and cons? Or should it all be in what starts to look like another God box? So I just pass that. Maybe I'll start at the other end with Bob, who is perhaps on one side.
The integration, there's proper integration. There are some things that go together and some things don't. Beer and Dorito goes together, okay? However, session border elements and some of the other switching functions or routing functions don't. The reason that Sonus integrates session border functions into its media gateway is because at the end of the day they're both doing voice switching and they have commonality of the traffic controls, the billing, what have you. So that's why we chose to do that, plus allows people to do the gradual migration. Conversely, there's absolutely a place for the dedicated appliance.
So you're not doing it in the signaling components?
Yes, yeah, we're both signaling and media. Okay, but like I say, for us under the skins, it's a voice call. Now, if it comes over GigE or an STM1, okay.
Ravi?
I guess I'll say that it probably does not make sense to have it in a router. I can say that because none of us are really router manufacturers.
Yeah.
Actually, in truth, I don't think it does make sense because I don't believe routers, except for the fact that they do handle the media streams, have the call control or the ability to support this kind of logic. And I'm not sure that's the right place in the network, frankly. I'd actually say that a media gateway is a reasonable place for an SBC potentially. And I think SBCs, I think you're always going to have standalone SBCs. I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon. Also, I think as things evolve towards IMS, you're going to see functions like the BGF, the border gateway function, take on more and more of the SBC's role. And I think in some deployments you're going to see essentially session control move up higher and higher, into the call layer. What I mean by that is that the media functions are going to stay closer to the edge, and the signaling functions closer to the middle. On the other hand, I don't mean to confuse the issue here. If you look at MSF, they're actually saying, hey, it could be some scenarios you're going to see an integrated device, the session border gateway. So the way we look at it is simply that we have components, we have an architecture that can be split, that can be integrated. It depends on what the carrier wants to do. In certain scenarios on the interconnect side, I believe it's probably more sensible to have it integrated as a standalone function. On the access side, there's certain scenarios where you do want decoupling and potentially integration into other devices.
I'll ask Don and Glen. I have a suspicion I know what they're going to say, but
standalone appliance, of course. Yeah, no. I think it becomes a question of deployability. If you try to integrate too many functions into a single platform, it becomes very difficult to deploy. If you try to integrate routing protocols into and mix them and match them with session border control, session control protocols, now you have a challenge in deploying that device because you've got potentially different organizations trying to certify those protocols. You may have, it's just an operational barrier between the two organizations. So as a standalone appliance, it bounds the problem, if you will, to the session control as well as some of the media functionality. And we know what a session border controller is. We don't try to build on or add on or pull through other functionality with it. Certainly, as as the value of that session border controller increases, scale of the network increases, you may add more functionality to it, but you always want to be careful that you're not trying to build that God box that we speak of. So.
Yeah, certainly referencing the Cisco SBC within their router, I think that's a session is a stateful connection that's much different than just switching packets, which is line speed, obviously. So I would say that there is a role where maybe that becomes a portion of the IMS world where it tends to be handling the media traffic anyway, so why not become the media point for your session border controller, and I think that fits very nicely in the IMS model. But to actually take a router and make it a full-blown SBC by itself is probably a losing proposition.
Thank you. Questions from the floor? Yes.
Yeah, it's specific to cable. In the packet cable multimedia reference architecture, there's a function, application manager, which could be provided by the SBC, could be provided by a dedicated appliance from somebody like Canyon, or you've been seeing some of the application server vendors providing that function. What are the analysts' view on where that function should reside? And assuming your answer is probably the SBC, what advantages does that have over being a dedicated appliance or application server?
Who'd like to take that?
I'll certainly speak to that. So in PCMM, there is the application manager, and then there's the policy decision function. So I think that it was decoupled to some degree because there's the concept of that deep packet inspection device that may be able to look at it across multi-protocols. But I think when you look at session control, multimedia protocols, SIP for example, it becomes very challenging to really fully understand the protocol and make those requests and responses. I think that's why we add the application manager function really to the session border controller. In that context, we're not saying that we want to be the complete application manager for all your protocols, but certainly it's such a specialized function for your voice over IP that it probably should be integrated. You can then decouple the policy decision function. The Camient certainly fulfills that role.
Anybody else?
Sure. Actually, I think we agree with that view. I think some of those architectures, when you look at them, it goes again back to deployability. You know, some of these decoupled scenarios where you have a PDF separated, you really have to look at what you're getting out of it. One carrier actually